Merci Geneviève. À présent...
Thank you, Geneviève. Pierre Larrouturou. On behalf of the S&D, your rapporteur on the 2020 budget, 1,100 billion and 116 billion. 1,100 is the estimate of how much will be needed to effectively fight climate change, and 116 billion, but 10 times less, is what is allowed for in the Commission's plan. What does that make you think? Because it doesn't make me think very much. I'm not sure if my mic is working, says Mr. Larrouturou. It is now. Thank you very much. First of all, thank you all for turning out in such large numbers from the four corners of Europe and the four corners of Brussels, so we all have very full diaries. Obviously, we have a suicidal system, and if we're all here, it's because we're angry, whether we're young people, MEPs, experts, or whatever. Geneviève told us that in 1992 she started work with the President of the European Commission on this, and at that stage the forecast was already very clear, and it was already clear that strong action needed to be taken. We can see the power of the lobbies, because for years now we've had disgraceful inertia because of the lobbies' action. And if we're here today, it's because we're not going to accept mankind's suicide. We all occupy a different role in society, but together we must take action before it's too late and before we're all wiped out. We're an intelligent species. We're supposed to be Homo sapiens. But sometimes I wonder whether we're not a sapiens species destroying its own planet. The estimate you mentioned, Geneviève, was an estimate from the European Court of Auditors. In 2012, with Stéphane Hessel and Michel Rocard, our slogan was, to save the banks, you invested 1,000 billion, you should do the same for the climate. That was a kind of slogan. But now it's the European Court of Auditors, very serious people, some of whom may be here, who say that if we want to win the battle, it's not too late, but we need 1,100 billion. What the Court of Auditors did was look at each country and see how much they needed. It was the head of industry in Germany who said, we need to speed up, but we need 50 billion each year to make a success of the ecological transition in industry. If that's what's needed for industry, we'll have needed 20 billion for housing, and so on and so forth. Angela Merkel and her ministers have said, I don't know where to find that money. The very next week, it was in the Netherlands, where thanks to young people, there was a court case against the government, which is not doing enough, that the Prime Minister said, we'll have to insulate 2 million houses before 2030. But who's going to pay for that? We also need to protect our country from the ocean, where levels are rising. Who's going to pay for the dikes? So it's the European Court of Auditors that are saying each year we need 1,100 billion per year. And usually you read Court of Auditors reports at bedtime to make you fall asleep. But this time, I think we have to sit up and pay attention. If the ECA says this is not enough, then we need to do more. When you hear about action against Bolsonaro and so on, everybody agrees. But if that is the objective, if in 2040 we have the budget, and then in 2043 we have enough technology, the Court of Auditors saying it's still not enough. You cannot count on so many miracles to reach your aim. Now is when you have to provide the funding for public transport, insulation of houses, buildings, and so on. So the Court of Auditors are saying, as of 21, we will need 1,100 billion per year. I don't have a magic wand. I have a doctor friend who's worked on AIDS and said that things are much better if a patient can take the or the combination of 3 medicines per day. Today, we've tried to get people assembled around 3 proposals, which are very effective. And if we get them all together, they'll be very effective. And on which there's consensus in all the networks. The MEPs, NGOs who've often come to see us, knocking on our doors. And we think that these 3 solutions basically are commensurate with the task. The first is, as mentioned earlier, we need to stop new investments. So stop investing in fossil fuel, as Geneviève already mentioned. It's clear that money now going into fossil fuel will have to finance other things. So we need that switch straight away. 3 concrete proposals. One here is to have a FATCA Climate Act. Mrs. von der Leyen said she wanted this and wanted it in her first 100 days. Great, but what will be in that act? We draw the parallel with what Barack Obama, the US president, did in 2010 when he had the FATCA Act, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, adopted. At the time, it was to fight tax evasion, but Barack Obama said no bank will be able to do business in the United States if it's not totally transparent to the US inland revenue. There was a real battle, but within a year, Barack Obama got the FATCA Act, and now no bank can do business in the US if it's not totally transparent to the US inland revenue. We'll have a proposal for a climate FATCA to propose to Mrs. von der Leyen very soon, saying no bank will be able to do business on European soil if it's not totally transparent regarding all its activities and what it finances in Europe and elsewhere. As Geneviève said, we want to also have the taxonomy of what's good for the climate and what is not. And there will be lobbies saying, we don't want you to say what's bad for the climate, but we want total transparency. Secondly, within 1 year, we want a ban on new investment in fossil fuels. And within 5 years, we want them to clean up their balance sheets. I had a friendly chat with one of the main heads of the major insurance companies recently who said, I can't put everything in writing, but it is feasible. First, transparency. Secondly, stop new investments in fossil fuels. And within 5 years, all banking and insurance funding invest in fossil fuels will be moved into green investments. The second idea is a tax on kerosene. I think a group of young people launched an initiative on this in order to stop people flying so much and in large vessels have a tax on kerosene and put an end to the exemption they have. So tax justice and climate efficiency. If someone takes his car to go to work, he pays a tax on the petrol, and if somebody powers his great big boat to go to the other side of the world for his holidays, he pays no tax. That's not fair. I can't speak in Carl's place, but if it's feasible, all we need is the political will. The third proposal we'd like to put up for discussion today, which I think will attract a lot of support, is the Climate Pact. Since I've been working on this for a few years, I'm going to take another minute to tell you about this. The argument is to save the banks, as we said with Michel Rocard, etc. In 2008, 1,000 billion was made available to save the banks within 1 week, and all the legal problems were solved out. We need to do the same for the climate. People will say, oh, dream on. It won't be possible. It was done once on a one-off basis for the banks. Well, thank goodness it was done, otherwise this financial system would have collapsed. But in 2012, 2013, they turned around and said to us, you're not serious. The central banks did it once, they're not going to do it again. Then in 2014, there was an important event. A taboo was broken. The European Central Bank announced that it was going to create 1,000 billion because a lot of countries were falling into recession. So what was not possible 1 week earlier suddenly became possible, and the European Central Bank announced it. We used to have machines printing money, but now it's the computer. So in other words, the money supply is going to rise by that amount. You use complicated words so that the ordinary citizen will say, I don't understand any of this, better not to talk about it, I won't make a fool of myself. But I think that with this, the ECB is saying that in one day, the 23rd of March 2017, it created 233 billion euros to be lent to the banks, the commercial banks. Nicolas Hulot, Minister for the Climate, resigned as a result of this. He wanted 7 billion per year to insulate buildings. He was told that's not serious. But with no democratic control, the central bank created 233 billion in 1 day. In total, until 2 years ago, we had Philippe Meistad, highly respected in Belgium, former Minister of Finance, who put order in Belgium's finances. And although he was of remarkable assistance to us right to the end. So with Philippe, the former Bank of the European Investment Bank, and you knew all this by heart, we looked at all the quantitatising and saw that there was 2,600 million created in the space of 3 years. When we tried to see where the money had gone, only 11% went to the real economy. And most of it, almost 90% of it, went into speculation. So every month the financial markets are breaking new records. The Dow Jones index in the US went up 14,000 points before it collapsed. The previous year it was at 20,000. And then in July 2019 it was at 27,300 points. Donald Trump was very happy, tweeting all night. But Christine Lagarde is telling us there'll be a new financial crisis. And you can see that according to Les Echos, this new world crisis could cause 10 times more damage than the one 10 years ago. So to come back to the question, are we Homo sapiens sapiens or are we debilus debilus? We've been told for years that there's a huge climate problem. We're told it could be this could be an opportunity. We could breathe fresher air, have better health, and so on. And we're told there's no money to finance it. But if you read the papers properly, you'll see there's never been as much money around. It's just going to the wrong places. It's just being invested speculatively. The ECB announced just a month ago that it's going to start again with a further 240 billion euros being created. We had a debate in the S&D group yesterday. If the ECB is going to create 250 billion euros in 1 year, starting on the 1st of November, where is that money going to go? Is it also going to speculation, or will it go to the climate, biodiversity and jobs, i.e. for the common good? But apparently that's the amount that's going to be created in a year. The Climate Pact consists of two tiles, a true climate bank, a real Marshall Plan, if you like. The Marshall Plan helped us a lot in Europe. We want a Marshall Plan for Europe and Africa. It's not about more liquidity. Philippe Meistad used to say we could have 2 times less liquidity. Even if the ECB only spent 120 billion, but it went on climate, it could be enough. So we want a genuine climate bank. And we've drafted the treaty, and each country would know that over 30 years it would have an amount corresponding to 2% of its GDP. That's the figure put forward by Nicola Stern, the UK economist, who said if we want to win the climate battle, it is possible and it will create jobs, but it needs 2% of the GDP. Last Friday, I was in a debate with the president of the Belgian National Bank, who said that's perfectly reasonable, 2% of GDP. You can do that without triggering inflation or any crisis. So we want this bank to be required to lend each country 2% of its GDP. So each year France would have 45 million euros over 30 years. Germany would have 60, Poland 16 each year. And it can be put together. It can be done. Currently, the EIB has one subsidiary. We can have another one, the ECB, for climate and biodiversity. And here we'll have the leverage we will need. KfW in Germany only has 27.3 million in equity, but look at how much it lends. So it's quite possible to have a climate bank. When the Berlin Wall came down 30 years ago, because European citizens brought it down, it didn't fall all on its own. In the space of just 6 months, Helmut Kohl and François Mitterrand said we need a tool to finance the transition. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and so on. And in the space of 6 months, they created the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, or BERD in French. So we need a climate bank like that with funding. And the second tool we're proposing is a proper climate budget. We want to have a Marshall Plan for Africa. Bamako, in Mali, 2 days ago, I was amazed to see the misery there. And when they talk about climate change, they're talking about climate AIDS. It's going to be just as catastrophic for their continent as AIDS. So we need a proper Marshall Plan for them. Europe spent billions on Airbus and on Ariane. Can't they invest to have renewables stored, to have cars designed that consume less fuel? We all need to walk more too. But can't we also invent a much lighter, perhaps slower car for the future? We chose to go to the moon, said the Americans. People thought Kennedy had a touch of the sun. But they created 400,000 jobs and they multiplied the budget by 15. And in the space of 5 years, NASA's budget was multiplied by 15. Enabling them to land on the moon earlier than predicted. Isn't saving our planet, saving mankind, more important than going to the moon? So we want a Marshall Plan for Africa. We want a proper investment plan. If we ask all Europeans to insulate their houses, all farms and buildings to convert, you'll need what are called subsidies. Because you can never make this mandatory. Our aim is to have a law saying that within 20 years all buildings have to be insulated and you have a new model of farming. And people need to realise that they'll be given aid for this. Now, how do we find 1,000 billion per year? 30% of Belgians and of French, those worse in other countries, don't have €1 of savings. 30% of us are called up by the bank every year because they're in the red. You can't ask them to pay this bill. So back to Jacques Delors. 25 years ago, he said we needed to fight against intra-European tax competition. And you might think the world has been turned on its head in Europe at present. Tax on profits has gone down to 90%. In the US, from Roosevelt to Trump, it was 38%. So a liberal country, the United States, had a tax rate that was twice as high as ours. Under Trump, has gone down to 25%, of course. So if we want to fight for jobs, for the climate, for biodiversity, have a Marshall Plan for Africa, have aid for all households in Europe, we want to propose a European tax on profits. It wouldn't affect small enterprises, it wouldn't affect your craftsmen, but a bigger effort would be required of large companies, 3, 4, 5%, and even with a tax of 3, 4, 5%, European taxes still wouldn't be higher than in the US. Finally, on this, from the economic point of view, the share of profits not reinvested is really growing. Le Figaro, not exactly left-wing paper. Le Figaro, Alex was saying that dividends, Alex, can you move on please, that dividends went up 23.5% in France last year. So they can't find the funds to finance a Marshall Plan for Africa. But look at the dividends being paid to shareholders. And when more and more profits are not reinvested, let's take a slice of them to create jobs. This is not going to be money burned in the Parliament's boiler room. It's going to be used to create jobs, a very good thing. When Roosevelt came to office, it was the same. Texas was lowering its taxes, so were others, and they looked at it all, and in the space of 4 months, Roosevelt introduced a federal tax on profits. That's why the rate remained so stable in the US for many years, and it didn't affect US prosperity at all. If we have this tax, if we have this budget, we'll be able to then design exemptions to allow households to do the necessary insulation work. Farmers will be able to produce biogas instead of having manure leaching into the groundwater. And this can all create 5 million jobs in Europe. I was in Grenoble the other day, and I talked to a gentleman who told me that he's been living in a tower block for 20 years. He said, 2 years ago, my tower block was insulated. I'm warmer in winter, I'm cooler in summer, and I spend less on the energy bills for my family. So it'll save jobs, it'll improve comfort for all sorts of households, and it won't go into carbon-style spending. Alex, please, we need to make progress. There's no magic wand, but we can't accept inertia either. Stefan Hessel wrote a book, Rise Up, Citizens. A few days before he died, he said to me in his deathbed, never accept discouragement. We've seen systems that appeared inhuman and to be there for eternity. We've had apartheid, but we've seen the end of apartheid. We've seen the Berlin Wall, we saw it come down. If we had waited for the political leaders, it would never have come down. It was European citizens who brought it down. I'm very pleased to see so many of you here today to bring down this new Berlin Wall that is going to be suicidal for our race. Thank you.